welcome to Attachment Matters at the Theraplay Institute. We are very excited and honored to have Phyllis Booth, one of the co-founders of the Theraplay Institute, here today to talk to us about her life, her studies, and how it all began, how Theraplay began, how the Theraplay Institute began. So thanks for coming on this very snowy, horrible traffic morning, all of you hardcore folks, and I'm sure we'll have people filing in. We'll try to keep as quiet as we can, and actually let's hold all the questions for the end for today as well. And I'm going to skip introductions in the interest of time, but I think that we pretty much know everybody here. Is there anything else I need to introduce about you?
So.
You're going to tell us all about yourself.
No.
Okay, great. All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank
I
you.
have a little preface. My little preface.
Okay.
Phyllis gave this talk in September for a group that we met. And my question to the group was to listen, and at the end, I'm going to take a vote. And I want you guys to decide, even if it's like 49, 51%, do you think it's more nature or do you think it's more nurture that she got to be the way she is today?
Interesting. All right. Then I think that's
So, what I want to do today is give you my memories. I've got some notes so I can remember how to keep them in sort of sequence. And I think there are really two threads. One of them is my own personal growing up experience, and the other one, not just growing up, but you know, my personal experience. The other one is the thread of the various theories and ideas that I came in touch with in academic situations or in real life. So what I want to start with is something about my heritage, where I come from, and that goes way back to the middle of the 19th century. One of my grandfathers, my great-grandfather, was a shopkeeper or maybe a shop hand in England, and he was converted to the Mormon Church at the age of 22. And in 1853, he sailed for America, married a woman on the ship that I think he already knew her. I think they'd gotten onto the ship together. They went to New Orleans, they went up the Mississippi River. The Mormon Church had supplied wagons and cattle and food and went across the plains. When he got there, there's accounts of how much they struggled in the beginning. No food, they were having to just dig holes in the side of the mountain to keep warm in the winter. But he managed to develop a kind of he became a banker. He had a canning factory. He was on the city council. So from this very modest beginning, but I have to say he obviously was a man of some hardiness, just like you are all hardy getting here this morning in the snow. So I have that in my background. On my other side, the families that came were even with less money and pushed hand carts across the country. So I figure that if you didn't die on the way, you had pretty good genes. So there's your nurture. But also I think it's sort of seeking new things and interesting things. I had a very, on my mother's side, I had a very loving grandmother, and grandfather too. My father's mother was more austere, more sort of, I never remembered feeling close to her. But this grandmother, my mother's mother, her name was Martha Healy Strong, and my name is Phyllis Strong Barnes Booth. So there we have a strong thing in there. I remember her as a sort of warm, sort of roly-poly, loving person, and she had always in her kitchen a bin as big as this yellow table full of sugar cookies. We could always have a sugar cookie. Now, I would like to go back and see that bin now that I'm bigger, but it did seem like it was this big. I have another memory of hers too. She had 12 children. The first 2 died very young, and the last 2, Mildred, the youngest, died when she was about 12. One summer when we went to visit, she brought out a pair of blue felt slippers that had been Mildred's. So obviously a treasure. She gave them to my sister, who was 2 years older than I. My sister put one on her foot and went, "Look, Grandma," and the slipper flew and landed in the pail of milk. Grandma laughed and laughed and laughed and hugged her and said it was okay. And you know, I've thought about that. Something as precious as Mildred's slippers that she'd kept all those years, and yet she could keep her eye on what a funny thing this happened. You know, there was something very loving and sensitive about her. There's one other story about that family, and that is that in the middle of the night, my grandmother woke my grandfather. She says, "There's somebody stealing our coal," and Grandpa said, this is the way the story goes, I wasn't there, "That's all right, he needs it more than we do." And so there was a kind of generosity and support to other people that I admire. I've mentioned that my ancestors were members of the Mormon Church, and I grew up in a very devout Mormon family where our whole center of focus was the Mormon Church. My father became an important, he wasn't, I don't think he was ever a bishop, but he became the next higher level than that. The Mormon Church has lay ministry, so people don't train for the ministry, but people are appointed to take on the pastoral roles and that sort of thing. So we were very much involved in the church, and I think it made it, for me, a sense that there was a bigger community that was all supportive. Now, just to think now more about my own childhood and think about it in terms of the dimensions of Theraplay, I think my pleasure in play and engagement comes, my biggest memory is playing with my father. He would get down on the floor on his back. He would have us up on his knee, not us, me. I'm talking about me here, up on his knees, and he'd say, 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and 4 to go. And he would drop his knees, and I would be in his arms with a hug. So there's that, and then, you know, then I would say, more. So it's a delightful memory of the pleasure of anticipation, the excitement, and the big hug at the end that I think is a very nice model for what we think of when we think about engagement and play. My mother was also playful. We always made the beds together in the morning, and I remember many times I would run ahead and get into the bed under the sheets, and she'd come in and she'd say, "Oh, there's a lump in my bed, there's a lump in my bed," and then she'd feel oh, it's a mop. Oh no, it isn't. And then, okay, we'd play this game. She would find me, we would get out and we'd make the bed. But here's a sort of mundane task that was added, had some delight in it. My mother would come in the morning and sing, "Good morning, Mary Sunshine, what makes you wake so soon? You smile away the little stars and smile away the moon." Oh, I didn't get that quite right. She did it better than that. But there was always this sort of cheerful, welcoming sense. Now, the other side of my mother was really important in terms of nurture. I have memories of, I remember, we could always count on, and I'd have to give you a little information here. In California, where I grew up, when there was a rainy day, we had a shorter schedule because we couldn't go out to play in the rain. My mother, who never worked outside of the house, though she had taught school before she married, was always there. And I remember those rainy days with great warmth, because there'd be hot chocolate and we would sit on the front room floor and play board games, actually, but games anyway. So there was this sense that my mother was there to take care of us. We would sit in the car, and I would be in the back seat, and she would hold my hand and stroke it, and she said, "Oh, you have such soft hands." So she was, and when I went back later with my own children, I could see how much she just loved the touch and the cuddling and the caregiving that she could do. One other memory about her was that I remember probably more than once feeling a little out of sorts and everything, and my mother finally would come along and say, "Oh, you've got a fever." And then she would put me into bed, the sheets, into clean sheets. She would tuck me in. She would bring me toast and not tea, because we don't drink tea in the Mormon church, but something comforting. And okay, I'm sick, but everything's okay. Mom's going to take care of me. So that was a very strong sense that I could always count on her, even before I was aware that I was sick, that she was there to take care of me. Now, in terms of challenge, there was plenty of high expectations in my family. My dad had, when I was 3 months old, he had decided to get a PhD at the University of California in Berkeley, and so the family went down there. I spent my first 3 years on the Berkeley, California campus, though I don't remember it. So he was a high achiever. That was not so usual in Salt Lake City at that point. There were very high expectations. I never had anything less than an A in high school, just. And the other thing is that my father, I think about him particularly, sort of fed my interest in the world. I remember sort of weeding the garden with him, sort of spading around the plants, and he explained to me why we needed to till the soil. Because of the way it would break up the air patterns and make the soil work better. So there was always a willingness to explain and talk about things. We always went to the library to get books, and a lot of reading to us. Now, in terms of structure, we were a very organized household. On Monday we did mother did the washing. On Tuesday she did the ironing. On Wednesday she did the mending. We were that song of Monday wash day, Tuesday ironing. Everybody happy? Well, so are we. And I think that sense of order and structure was a very important thing for me. I think the Mormon church also provided a sense of structure. We did go to church on Sunday. We knew what we were going to be doing there. We knew what was expected of us, and there was never any harsh punishment we were kept to. Now, I think the issue of safety comes out of all of this, really. I felt safe. There was a God in the heavens. If you prayed to him, it wasn't certain that he would respond to exactly what you asked for, but I could count on his taking care of me. And this was brought home to me years later when I was in college. I met my future husband, and he said, I don't really believe in God. And I had a friend who said, I don't really believe in God, and this is really heresy in the Mormon church. And so one day I'm walking along. Provo, Utah is a very small town, no heavy traffic. I crossed a side street and suddenly thought, if there's no God, I have to be careful. So that tells us, I was living with the sense that God was taking care of me. I knew he was also watching me, and that I had to do the right thing. I remember once being in a hurry and tossing something into my closet and saying to myself, I'll be back later, God, and pick it up. You know, I knew I was supposed to hang it up, but I was too busy. I just wanted him to know. So he forgave me, and I did hang it back up. Sense that my parents could protect me, that I had a safe place to be, and that there was a God that took care of me. So I did not grow up in a hellfire and brimstone kind of environment, which I think is a great gift. Another thing about safety, I'm just thinking, when I went to my boyfriend's senior prom, I was a junior, we went out afterwards, and maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, the car wouldn't start. So I phoned my dad, and he said, okay, I'll come. You know, just as easy as that, and he came and took us home. You know, never any, what the hell are you, this kind of thing, but of course I'm going to come. So I like that memory about his being there. So I'm painting a very rosy picture here. It wasn't all perfect. I did not have perfect parents, but I think I learned a lot about myself. I learned that I was loved and lovable. There are images of me as a 2-year-old, you know, the way a 2-year-old ought to be. Aren't you happy to see me? You know? I learned that I can master challenging things, that I can share good feelings, I can respond to other people's needs, and they will respond to mine. I certainly learned that the world was a place that I could manage, that there were, you know, people would take me in, people would take care of me if I needed help. It was a good beginning for me. Now I have to keep reminding you, I'm painting the most beautiful picture here. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't protect me from self-doubts and anxieties and periods of depression and anxiety, but it really gave me a start that made it so, okay, I think I can make this. But I always then have to say, hold on to Daphne's hand and say, Daphne, help me with the next talk, or Sandra, you know. So it also left me feeling I could connect with other people, and that would be helpful. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit to how I got more involved with working with children. I'm the second of 4 children, so I watched my mother care for my baby brother when I was 5 and a baby sister when I was 13. That is, they came along when I was those age. When I was in high school, I did a lot of babysitting. I enjoyed that. A home ec teacher who opened a nursery school in the high school so that we could have a little bit of chance to work with children. And as a result of that, in the summers between my first and second years at college, I worked in a wartime day nursery. So that was the beginning of my work with groups of children. Up to that point, well, I've left out a whole thing. There was music in our home, and I took violin lessons from the time I was about 8. Mother played the piano, my sister played the piano. So there was always this playing together, not just rolling around on the floor, but playing together musically. And I had in my mind that I was going to become a junior high school music director because I fell in love with my junior high school music director. He was a lovely man. He did a wonderful job with the orchestra, and best of all, he really made a tremendous outreach into the community, making sure kids had instruments, families could help their kids get lessons and that sort of thing. So there was my ideal. Went to college as a music major, but these 2 experiences of working in the nursery school, the Wartime Day Nursery, changed my mind. I thought, this is what I want to do. I have a memory of the first summer that I was doing this. This is my point of view. I'm 18, and these older ladies were sitting around, and they're letting me do all the work. Probably happy to see somebody who was lively and, you know, I thought they thought I was really hot stuff. And I remember one afternoon, the children were all, if you have children all day, you have to have naps, and so the children were all settled down and having a nap. And I'm sitting there painting with green paint an orange crate. And you people don't even know about orange crates, but they used to be made of wood. And they made very nice, on their side, shelves for toys. So I'm painting with green, and I suddenly think, they're paying me to do what I really like to do. So that was my, that was what I really thought I would change from the music major to more working with nursery school. So then I was going to be a nursery school teacher. The other influence that happened in college was that I met Wayne Booth, who later became my husband. He went off to war and was in England after the war. He went into the war late and was England after the war, and he knew I was interested in the nursery school and sent me Susan Isaac's books about the Malting House Nursery School, which is very famous, based on Kleinian theory, and if you have never read Susan Isaac, you ought to read her. So he was already feeding my interest in working with children. After 3 years of college, he came home, and so at the age of 20, we got married and came to the University of Chicago. He had long wanted to go to the University of Chicago, and he was pursuing a PhD in English literature, and I taught in the nursery school at the University of Chicago, and did graduate work, finished up the BA, which I hadn't quite completed, and went on. It was, our relationship was very supportive, very, very loving, and I think he was remarkably helpful to me. In a way, I transferred this sense of safety from my own family to my life with him. That's, young people these days don't do that so quickly, and I think there were some ways in which it didn't help me grow up as soon as I might have, but I carried this attachment figure with me, and my sense of it is that we never, as Bowlby says, never get beyond needing an attachment figure, and so he became that for me. He was a playful, good father. Our son died when he was 18, was hit by a car, and Wayne was tremendously supportive throughout that period. So anyway, this is my praise of Wayne. So it was very good. Oh, another couple of things. We agreed, we were very sophisticated, forward-looking, that we would be 50-50 on the housework, but he had a different idea of 100% than I did. So the other thing about him, which I think is really important, is that because I was always going out playing chamber music with other people, he decided he would take up the cello. And so after he finished his PhD, he took up the cello, really got so he was quite good, and so our whole life together was full of these wonderful moments of playing together. He wrote a book about learning to play the cello at the age of 33. I learned a lot at the University of Chicago Nursery School. You know, before that, I had just been this brash young person who liked to play with children and had some idea about how to manage them in groups. We had, I think, weekly case conferences. Maybe it wasn't that frequent. The woman who came to consult with us, her name was Helen Ross, and she had had training with Anna Freud in England. So she was very much conveying Freudian kinds of interpretation of what's going on with the children. In preparation for a case presentation, we would carefully observe a child. Somebody would be responsible for taking notes, figuring out what was happening. And invariably, by the time we sat down to the case conference, the child was better. Just that much attention made for quite a lot of change. But of course we had things to talk about, Freudian ideas of psychosocial development, the oral, anal, Oedipal conflicts, the she emphasized the importance of the mother-child relationship about a little boy who was having a lot of difficulty. His mother was very ill. I think she may have had breast cancer or something. And I remember the comment, he's missing being able to be hugged. It's not just just a thinking in their mind about these conflicts and sort of dry Freudian theories, but very much what's going on in the relationship between the child and the parent. Just one more thing that I remember from her, which has to do with structure. Within this whole discussion of what might be going on with the child, she said, you know, if you have no way of stopping a child from doing something that he shouldn't do, or from hurting somebody or hurting himself, you have no control at all. And that's always stayed with me as an important support for our the sense of the importance of structure. We do have to be able to keep a child safe. And I heard that from her early on. Now, at the nursery school, everybody was keen on the new Hines Kohut, self-psychology. He was here in Chicago, and there was a lot of talk about self. There were also families that were very much involved in the psychoanalytic circles, and one psychiatrist, well-known psychiatrist in the community in Chicago, brought his 3-year-old boy into the nursery school, and the child was angry, and he said, and the father said, "Oh, he's just in his Oedipal phase." And I found that really jarring. That is not what I thought a father should be doing, is just analyzing something. So this is the beginning of my sort of struggle with how can you make use of the insights, and particularly the analytical ones that I was learning at that point, without somehow contaminating what's a real relationship. Now, the other important thing that happened in the nursery school was that in my 3rd year of teaching at the nursery school, I became a head teacher, and Gern Berg became my assistant teacher. She was a year younger than I, and she was in a graduate program at the university, so we had a year together, and that was the beginning of a relationship that has made a huge difference in my life. She went on, she stayed on, finished up her PhD. I went away, and it was when I came back to Chicago that she contacted me and then recruited me to do work with the Head Start program. So she figures strongly in the influences on me. We're talking 46 to 50. I took courses from Carl Rogers. I had read some of his work when I was an undergraduate, so when I saw that he was available, I was delighted to be able to take courses. He was, everybody, all the graduate students were really enamored of him and very excited about his ideas. And I remember a big classroom, 120 people in it, and he led the most useful discussions you can imagine. So a really good discussion leader, and a role model for all of us. Now, inevitably, all these graduate students who were so keen on learning from Rogers would sort of make fun of it. So I can remember people saying, "I'm going to go out and get a Coke." "You're going to go out and get a Coke." You know, this sort of a kind of distortion of the Rogerian reflection of what somebody had just said. I also heard a graduate student say, you know, we just feel unconditional positive regard about our children. They can sleep in the bed with us. I don't even mind if they wet. I thought, well, I don't know that unconditional positive regard necessarily includes that. But those are sort of playful distortions of Rogers' message. The basic thing was that at that point, authoritarian parenting was out, and self-demand following the child's lead was the new thing. Also, I think, as I say, this unconditional positive regard was an important thing, and I think that's an important aspect of what we do in Theraplay. We do accept, while we set limits, we surprise children by not saying, "Oh, that's bad, don't do that," this sort of thing. So we have a kind of more welcoming view. Now, the flip side, the other side of the client-centered, or well, let's say the client-centered approach, I experienced one summer when I had been away from Chicago, came up to Chicago for a week-long seminar, not led by Rogers, he had left by that time, but by some of his people. We spent the whole week talking about what we wanted to talk about. And I was very impatient about that. That kind of non-directive, you guys make it up yourself, just felt to me, I need more structure, please. You probably have all seen Virginia Axeline's first book about play therapy. The children in the photographs of those children were children in my nursery school. They deliberately had healthy children so that there was no lack of confidentiality, but I went looking at those pictures, I reckoned, oh, that kid was in my school. I never met Axeline, but I certainly found her work interesting. So I think that the positive messages from Rogers that come into Theraplay have to do with the attunement, the able to really listening and reflect back what's going on, an awareness of children's feelings, unconditional positive regard, and a strong belief in the self-actualizing principle, as Rogers talks about it. Children, at the time I thought, if you just clear out the roadblocks, these children will blossom. Now, when I was raising my own children, I had some experiences that once when my first child was about 4 months old and I couldn't help her, I couldn't get her to stop crying, and I suddenly said to Wayne, I know why people throw their children out the window. Now, I don't know why out the window, except we were on a second floor. I did not throw her out the window, but it gave me a real insight into how desperate you can feel when you can't make your child feel better. I also, on dark afternoons when I'm out walking with my children, a child or two, one in a carriage, one walking along with me, the sense of loneliness. You know, I see young mothers with a child in a stroller, and I think mostly they're happy, but it's a lonely thing to be alone all day with children. I solved that problem by working half-time in the nursery school when my children were little. In terms of structure, I had bought into the idea of following the child's lead. To Wayne's view, a bit too much. He thought I went way overboard and let my kids do things that they shouldn't have done. However, as a nursery school teacher, I knew that you needed to do some structure, so I managed to provide some there. I have one other story. I had read the works of Dorothy Barrack. I don't know whether any of you, I never run into anybody who knows Dorothy Barrack. She wrote Parents and Children Go to School. She had a nursery school. She did therapy. She wrote a book that's really comparable to Axeline's Dibs. It's called One Little Boy. And she was advocating something that's not new to any of you now because we're talking about it now, but to acknowledge the child's feelings before setting the limits. Making you really, really angry, I know, but we have to do it, would be the model she was using. I once said to Richie, who was 3 at the time, Richie, what you just did has made me really angry. And he said, Mama, you're angrier than you think. So, okay. After we left Chicago, we went to Haverford College and then Earlham College, where I again was teaching in the nursery school. They had a cooperative nursery that had been built just shortly before I got there, and so they were happy to have somebody who had some nursery school experience. In that setting, I had every day there would be 2 volunteer parents. So I had a lot of opportunity to talk to parents about how they were raising their children. And I found that I really like this. This is something that I like to do. So that was when I decided to come back and get more training. And we returned to the University of Chicago, not just because I wanted to. I would have gone someplace else, but Wayne got the job back here. So at Chicago, we learned about Piaget, Erikson. George Herbert Mead. How many of you have ever heard of George Herbert Mead? Well, he died in 1931. He was very close with John Dewey. He taught at the University of Chicago. He was a sociologist, philosopher, and a psychologist, I think. And I remember, I never met him. I was too young for that. But I heard about his ideas, and so about the fact that the self develops out of the reflection from the parent. And I have this image in my mind of a child in a high chair with the mother responding and the child learning about himself. Now that's definitely an idea that Bowlby we think of as very crucial to attachment theory. And it's interesting that I've never thought about, did Bowlby know about Mead? I don't know, but it was very interesting. The other thing that we were interested in is ethology. Lorenz was big at that point. We came back to Chicago in '62. The psychology building where I took many classes smelled horribly because of the animals in the basement. But we were very much interested in these things, that happen, the innate things that make for bonding. So, Lorenz with the little ducklings following him, or birds who are clearly imprinted on eyes. So that was an important thing that I was aware of before I became aware of Bowlby's interest in ethology. We also studied Freudian theory, and in my internship it was mainly psychoanalytic and child-centered kind of thing. When I was doing my internship, I was very much aware of the young psychiatrists who were learning to become psychiatrists, and Anna Freud was coming. It was a big occasion. She was going to give a lecture, and all the young psychiatrists were vying for the opportunity to present a case to her. And so somebody, the lucky person, presented a case, and Anna Freud, a kind of sturdy figure with heavy shoes, came in, sat down, and this young psychiatrist spun the most elaborate story of the theory of what was going on with the child. And Anna Freud said, yes. Oh, I know, I have to say one more thing. He was in a foster home and a parent, and the parents were in the picture too. She said, yes, but who buys the clothes? Sort of, let's get back down to who really has the relationship, who really has the connection with his child. So that was very important to me. So you've all heard the story about the beginning of Theraplay, and knowing me and knowing other people just recruited everybody to be part of that first team to provide psychological services for Head Start. And then when we found that we couldn't get help for the children who needed help, she said, we're going to play with the children. Now her idea of play came, as far as I know, not necessarily from Bowlby, but from Austin Delorier, who had some influence, some reading of Bowlby and Viola Brodie. So that the notion of playing and using as a model the kind of play that parents do with children was there for Anne in the beginning. In 1969, I spent a year in London, and I attended the Tavistock Center and had heard Bowlby lecturing every week, saw the Robertsons films that demonstrate the effect of loss on children. How many of you have seen John, or the first movie they made, which was a 2-year-old goes to hospital? And that was done by the Robertsons. They filmed a 2-year-old, healthy, energetic, lovely 2-year-old going in for a hernia repair. She was in the hospital for 10 days, and at that time the policy for hospital policies were parent visits once a week. So Jane, whatever, Mrs. Robertson, sat there and just filmed her, and she just got more and more, deflated. She was really in bad shape. Of course, when her parents came, she cried when they left, and the nurses said, "See, it just upsets them when they when you leave them." But this film had a powerful effect in changing hospital policy in England and the United States, I suppose, all over the world. So I had seen that movie. My year at the Tavistock came in 69, 70. And so at that point, the Robertsons had made a lot more films. And so the basic message that I got was the relationship, the sense of connection is extremely important. And the other part of the message that I got was related to the George Herbert Mead idea of children learn who they are, about themselves based on what their experiences are. So how they're mirrored, how the parent mirrors them, and that's how it helps them understand themselves. The other very important influence for me was Donald Winnicott. I was able to attend some case conferences in his home. I read a lot of his work, and I attended one lecture that he gave. And he was at that time just a year before he died. He was 70, I think. And he stood up in front of us in a ratty old cardigan, sort of, and he's saying to these young, he's somehow stroking himself like this, and the audience was mainly young psychiatrists in training, and he said, "Don't think you have to give some kind of clever interpretation. Just be with them. Just be there with them." A wonderful message for me. Let's not spend time trying to be smart. Let's just be there. Now, when I came back to Chicago, Anne had already made the first film, so that was I was not there in the first filming of that, the very beginnings of Theraplay, but I was very much caught up in the whole thing. I remember one day saying, I think what we're doing is providing what Winnicott calls the holding environment. And I found just the other day a quote from Winnicott. A couple of things. The foundations of health are laid down by the ordinary mother in her ordinary loving care of her own baby. The technique of holding, of bathing, of feeding, everything she did for the baby added up to the child's first idea of the mother, as well as fostering the ability to experience the body as the place wherein one securely lives. So that was my sense. As we play with these children, we are providing a kind of holding environment. So from the beginning, we were saying we are using the model of healthy parenting and the kind of play that parents do as we make our choices in Theraplay. And Bowlby has a wonderful quote: "The kind of parenting that parents do with their children is a very good model for any treatment approach." So I felt that I had really hooked into something that began to explain why our play with the children was so successful. Over the years since then, and I'm not going to go into all that, we've had so much wonderful research and insights into what kind of parenting, what it is about parenting that helps, the attunement, the responsiveness, even the play. And then we begin to think about how much that's important of regulation and then what it's doing to the brain, and we're just getting a picture both of what makes it possible for parents to do this and what it does for the child. I have a few more things I wanted to say before we open this up for just questions. As you know, Theraplay has always been emphasizing the here and now relationship and not, as you can hear from already what I've been saying, interpretation or what's going on intrapsychically with the child. In 1973, I spent 9 months as a substitute counselor at the orthogenic school, Bettelheim's orthogenic school. It was just after he'd left, so though I had had him in classes, I didn't see him in action at the orthogenic school. But the first day, very early at least, the first week I was there, I was sitting reading to a little girl, and another child, a slightly older, bigger girl, came along. The child I was reading to leaned back, sort of to laugh or something. This other kid sat on her. And they were just furious. Yeah. And I said, oh, it's just an accident. She didn't do that on purpose. So the child who'd been sat on was furious, and the child who sat on her said, there are no accidents at the orthogenic school. And okay, well, I thought that would have done as an explanation there, but I think she was saying I did it on purpose. The other thing that happened was that I felt that at the orthogenic school, the attention to the fantasies, the child's inner life, got in the way of my being able to actually keep a child safe. For example, this one child, being a substitute counselor is a horrible thing to be because the kids are angry that their counselor is gone. They're certainly angry at you. Being a substitute, anything is very hard. Anyway, this child would try to tight walk across the edge of the bathtub or across the top of her bedstead. And I wanted, and the kids said, no, you can't touch her. She's not allowed to be touched. I couldn't keep her safe if I couldn't touch her. Well, she couldn't be touched because she had all kinds of fantasies about what touch might mean. And so, I'm in favor of being able to touch and then talk about what the fantasies are later. On the matter of touch, when I went in '92, I spent a year at the Anna Freud Center, and I was a part of a cohort of young people who were learning to become child psychoanalysts. I was not trying to be supervised on any analysis. I was simply taking the courses that they were taking. And it became clear to me that there was a strong prohibition they felt, these young people, against touch. You do not touch the children. You only, there's nothing you can do. And that really intrigued me. So I read a lot of Anna Freud's works just to see what she had done. She's touching the kids all the time. If the child is out of control, she's holding him. If the child is unhappy, she's cuddling him. She did not feel that there was any problem with touch. But she was a nursery school teacher herself, so maybe that's how she learned about that. I think Winnicott's ideas about play have been very important to me. He really felt that play was an important thing, and he talks about play including just the physical play that parents do with children, but also the play when therapy is going well, the play of the minds of how people are sharing ideas and creating new meanings out of that sharing. I could go on, but no, I'm not going to go on. I'm just thinking there are many things to be said about how all of these ideas of Theraplay are now being either supported or refined with current research. Well, I think we should conclude this.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.